All right, so today we're going to be deep diving into an article from LitRPG Reads. It's called Craft Scatter Terrain for D&D in Just 2 Days. And big thanks to Paul Bello, fine fellow, for writing this one. You know, this article really got me thinking, because I was running a game just the other week, and the scatter terrain, well, it kind of stole the show, to be honest. We were in this creepy abandoned temple. I just thrown together some, crumbling pillars and stuff, some overgrown statues. Nothing too fancy, right? But then the party's barbarian decided to use a toppled statue as cover during a firefight with some cultists. And man, the whole scene just really popped. And it wasn't just about visual, Oh, that was cool too. It was the way the players had to think about positioning and how to use the terrain, to their advantage. It turned like a regular combat encounter into this really dynamic strategic showdown. And I think that's what this article really nails. Scattered terrain. It isn't just about looking pretty. It's about adding this whole other dimension
to your guess.
Yeah, it's super interesting how this article breaks down the benefits of scattered terrain, for both the players and the dungeon master. For players, it's about that immersion. Instead of just imagining you're hiding behind a wall, you can physically place your miniature behind an actual terrain piece. It just makes the world feel more real, more tangible. And then for dungeon masters, scattered terrain is such a gift. It gives you so many more options when you're designing encounters. Terrain can create choke points or force players to take different routes, and it even opens up opportunities for ambushes or strategic retreats. It just adds that element of unpredictability that keeps everyone on their toes.
Yeah, exactly. And the article uses that great example of the goblin ambush.
Right.
Where just a simple rock formation completely changes how the fight plays out.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly, the goblins have the high ground. And it forces the players to rethink their whole strategy.
It completely changes their tactics, yeah. And that's just one scenario, There are so many possibilities. Imagine a dense forest with fallen logs everywhere and thick undergrowth, perfect for stealthy characters to use as cover. Or what about a crumbling dungeon with all these narrow passageways and hidden alcoves? Ideal for setting traps or staging a dramatic reveal.
It's like the terrain becomes a storytelling tool in itself almost, not just a backdrop.
Oh, for sure.
But an active part of the narrative.
Exactly. And the article makes a good point about that. Scatter terrain isn't just for combat. It can be used for exploration, puzzles, even social interactions. Imagine using a winding path through a mystical forest to lead players to a hidden grove, or placing a weathered statue in a town square. That hints at some forgotten legend.
Okay, that's really cool. Now, I know some people might be a little intimidated by the idea of building terrain. I've definitely been there. But this article makes it seem super approachable, especially with this just 2 days concept. So let's dive into that. Let's start with day one. Building the foundations. What are the essential starting points?
Well, first off, don't overthink it. The article really emphasizes using simple materials. Things that are easy to find. Foam board, cardboard, even stuff you find around the house. Those are your building blocks. And a basic craft knife and a hot glue gun. Those will be your best friends. The key is to start with a solid foundation. The articles suggest creating basic shapes like rocks, trees, walls, things you can build on later. And remember, imperfections are your friend. A little roughness actually adds realism and character.
So it's kind of like building a skeleton. Before you add the muscles and skin,
exactly.
You start with that essential structure and then layer on all the details. But before we even get to cutting and gluing, the article mentions a step that a lot of people skip.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The blueprint stage is super important. Before you even touch your materials, take some time to sketch out your ideas. This helps you visualize the layout and make sure everything's to scale and figure out how the pieces will fit together.
That's really smart. It's like having a roadmap before you set out on a journey.
Yeah.
You know where you're going and how to get there. Plus, it probably saves you a lot of headaches later on, realizing halfway through that your awesome castle, it's way too big for your table.
Exactly. Planning ahead saves you time, frustration, and potentially a lot of wasted materials. It lets you experiment with different ideas and refine your vision before you commit to building anything.
Sounds like a solid strategy. So day one, it's all about laying that groundwork, gathering your materials, sketching out your ideas, and creating those basic shapes. It's about setting the stage for all the creative magic that comes next.
Yeah, exactly. Once you have those foundations in place, you're ready to move on to day two, where you bring your terrain to life with color, texture, and all those finishing touches that make it truly immersive.
Can't wait. We'll be back soon to dive into day two. and explore all the ways you can transform those basic shapes into stunning terrain pieces that'll take your games to the next level. Okay, so we're back, ready to tackle Day 2 of Paul Bello's Terrain Crafting Guide. Day 1 was all about, you know those foundations? Cutting foam, gluing cardboard, building that skeletal structure. But now, we got to bring some life to those bare bones creations. We're talking color, texture, all those details that turn a basic shape into something believable, something immersive. Where do we even begin?
Day 2 is where the artist in you comes out, and the article makes it really easy to follow, even if you're not a painter. First thing you focus on is the base coat. It's like priming a canvas, seals the material, creates a smooth surface for the next layers, and makes the colors pop. It just gives everything a more polished look.
Okay, so base coat's down, but a flat, single-color surface. It's not exactly exciting if you're looking at the pictures in this article. And all those textures make you want to reach out and touch them. How do we get that kind of depth, that realism?
That's where texturing techniques come in. The article talks about a few that are actually pretty simple, but super effective. Washes, for example, are amazing for adding depth and shadows. It's basically thinned down paint that settles into the crevices, makes things look more 3D instantly. Then there's dry brushing. That's the opposite. Highlights the raised areas and edges, creates that weathered look. You don't even need special tools for this, just an old brush, some slightly damp paint. Experiment a little, and you'll be surprised what you can do.
I could already picture myself covered in paint, going crazy with some foam rocks. But before I get carried away, let's talk color palettes. Choosing the right colors can make or break the whole thing, especially if you're trying to match a campaign setting. Any advice on that front?
It all comes down to understanding your campaign setting. If you're in a lush jungle, you want those vibrant greens, earthy browns, maybe some bright colors for flowers or creatures. But a bleak, post-apocalyptic world, you'd stick with grays, browns, rusts. It's about the mood, the atmosphere you want to create. Don't be afraid to use reference photos. Nature is the best inspiration. Look at pictures of forests, deserts, mountains, whatever environment you're trying to build.
Real-world inspiration everywhere. The article also mentions these small details that can really elevate a piece. Tufts of grass, tiny pebbles, maybe even miniature signs or treasure chests, like adding the final touches to a masterpiece.
Those little touches, they make the terrain feel so real, invite players to explore. Check out every nook and cranny, add a splash of color with painted mushrooms. Or lichen, scatter some realistic leaves around. You could even create little scenes, a campfire with LED flames, a bubbling cauldron with smoke. It's about sparking the imagination, making the world feel alive.
Okay, I am obsessed with this level of detail, but let's get practical for a second. We've spent hours painting, adding details. How do we make sure all this hard work survives actual gameplay? I'm imagining spilled drinks, clumsy hands, dice rolling mishaps.
Durability is key, and there's a simple solution. Sealant. A good clear coat protects the paint job, prevents chipping and fading, makes everything look more polished. Plus, it makes cleaning up spills so much easier. It's like terrain armor. Protects all your hard work.
Terrain armor. I love it. Okay, so we've got our base, we've textured it, added all the details, sealed it for durability. But what if we want to go beyond individual pieces? What if we want to create terrain that's tailored to our campaign? Something with that wow factor. Something that's not just functional, but really memorable.
Yeah.
And unique to our world.
That's where themed terrain comes in. It's about going beyond the generic stuff and creating pieces that are designed to enhance your specific setting. So if your players are in a haunted forest, you could make gnarled, twisted trees with creepy faces carved into them. Or if they're exploring a volcano, you could have lava flows, plumes of smoke, glowing crystals. Think about the iconic elements and bring those to life.
Okay, I'm getting some serious inspiration here, but before we get too carried away, let's address the elephant in the room, time and budget. Not everyone has unlimited resources.
Yeah.
Any tips for those of us working with limited time or a tight budget?
Absolutely. One of the best things about this article is its focus on accessibility. You don't need fancy materials or tools. Repurposing is your superpower. Cardboard boxes, egg cartons, plastic containers from takeout. With a little creativity, you can turn everyday items into incredible terrain pieces. And remember, imperfections add character. Embrace those wonky edges, the mismatched textures. It all adds to the charm and uniqueness.
That's music to my ears. Repurposing is good for the planet and good for our wallets. What about time-saving techniques? Any shortcuts or tricks? For those of us with busy schedules.
Batch painting is your best friend. Instead of painting each piece individually, group similar items together and paint them all at once. Saves you tons of time and helps ensure a consistent look. Another time saver is using stencils. You can make them out of cardboard or paper and use them to quickly add patterns or designs, like brick walls, cobblestone streets, tile floors.
Stencils, the ultimate weapon against repetition. We've talked about accessible materials, repurposing, batch painting, stenciling, any other cost-saving hacks.
Pre-made bases, they're a game changer. You can find them online or at hobby stores. They give you a ready-made foundation, save you so much time and effort. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. No more cutting out perfect circles for trees or agonizing over tricky angles.
Pre-made bases. Okay, that's going on my shopping list. We've covered a lot. Painting techniques, time-saving tips, budget-friendly hacks. But before we wrap up this part, I want to circle back to something. The idea that terrain is more than just a visual backdrop. It's a storytelling tool, a way to enhance immersion, to create memorable gaming experiences. Any final thoughts on that?
The most memorable terrain often tells a story. So think about incorporating elements that are unique to your campaign. A specific symbol, a hidden message, maybe a miniature replica of a player's favorite weapon. Those little details create a sense of wonder, make the world feel personal, like you created it just for your players.
Okay, I am officially inspired. We've gone from basic shapes to textured masterpieces, and now we're adding those storytelling touches that really bring it all to life. Can't wait to put these tips into action. But before we get too carried away, there's one more crucial aspect we need to talk about. Making sure all this hard work doesn't end up gathering dust in a closet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll tackle the practicalities of storage, along with some strategies for adapting and expanding your terrain collection. As your campaign evolves, stay tuned. All right, so we're back. We've crafted, we've textured, we've detailed. Our terrain is basically ready to go. But before we unleash those, fearsome orcs. On our meticulously crafted villages, there are a few practical things to consider. You know Paul Bello, fine fellow, reminds us about the tele, less glamorous side of terrain building, storage maintenance, and adapting your collection as your campaign grows.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of creating, but thinking about storage ahead of time can save you a lot of trouble later on. Imagine spending hours on a detailed dungeon, only to have it get ruined because you didn't store it properly.
Oh man, I can already picture myself digging through a box of terrain, pieces breaking off left and right. Not a good way to start game night. So what are some strategies for keeping our terrain organized and in good condition?
The article has some great tips, and it really depends on the type of terrain. For big, sturdy pieces like walls or buildings, stackable bins work great. Just make sure they're clean and dry to prevent moisture damage. For more delicate pieces, especially those with fine details or breakable parts, you might want padded boxes or even custom compartments within a larger box. A little cushioning goes a long way.
Yeah, it's like creating a safe haven for our terrain traders. But what about maintenance? Any tips for keeping those paint jobs fresh and those details intact?
A soft brush is your best friend. Dust those pieces regularly to prevent any buildup that can dull the colors or hide the details. And if you do get some minor damage, a loose piece or chipped paint, don't worry. A little glue or paint can fix it right up.
The power of a quick fix. It's good to know we don't have to start from scratch every time. But speaking of things changing, let's talk about adaptability. What happens when our players decide to explore a new environment, or when our story takes an unexpected turn? Do we need to build all new terrain?
Not at all. That's where modular terrain shines, the article talks about. Creating pieces that you can rearrange, combine, or even modify. So you can build different settings. You could have a collection of basic walls, pillars, platforms, maybe some rocks and trees, and combine them in different ways to make dungeons, forests, villages, whatever you need.
It's like having a terrain construction set.
Yeah.
Constantly evolving. Right along with our story, I'm already thinking about how to turn those dungeon walls into a futuristic cityscape. The possibilities are endless. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to come back to something we've talked about a lot. The idea that terrain is more than just a visual thing. It's a storytelling tool, a way to enhance immersion and create those memorable gaming experiences. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah. Terrain is a blank canvas, waiting for you to bring it to life with your creativity and your imagination. So don't be afraid to experiment, to make it personal, to add your own style. Think about those little details. That will surprise your players. A hidden passage, a secret message, maybe even a tiny version of their character's favorite tavern, hidden away somewhere. The best terrain tells a story. It invites players to explore, to interact, to really become a part of your world.
Beautifully said. And a big thank you to Paul Bello, fine fellow, for this fantastic article. Now, for all you terrain enthusiasts out there, we want to hear from you. What are your best terrain building tips or tricks? What's the most creative use of scatter terrain you ever seen or come up with? Head over to the comments. And share your stories and ideas. We can't wait to see what amazing creations you come up with.